She was lying in a hospital bed, 8 months pregnant, screaming through contractions while her husband stood in the hallway arguing with the billing department. His exact words, "I am not paying $8,000 for someone else's bad decisions." He refused to authorize her epidural. He called it too expensive. His mother arrived at 2 in the morning not to comfort her daughter-in-law, but to call her a gold digger in front of the nursing staff. His sister live-streamed the whole thing to 10,000 followers, laughing about how her brother got trapped by a baby. And while she delivered their daughter completely alone, while she nearly bled to death from complications, her husband was 3 miles away in a hotel room with his mistress, texting about their divorce timeline. He thought she was worthless. He thought she was powerless. He thought he could destroy her and walk away without consequences. He had no idea that the pregnant wife he abandoned at the hospital secretly owned his entire company, his mother's career, and every single dollar his family had ever earned. What happened next made him collapse in a courtroom, crying so hard that bailiffs had to drag him away in handcuffs. His mother lost her 15-year career in a single sentence. His mistress discovered that the future he promised her was built entirely on stolen money, and the woman they all dismissed as worthless. She walked out of that courthouse with full custody, complete vindication, and control of a $200 million empire. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. Her victory was just the beginning, because the moment she claimed her inheritance, she inherited enemies far more dangerous than her husband ever was. This is not just a story about revenge. This is a story about a woman who was crushed by everyone she trusted, who lost everything, who was told she was crazy and worthless and disposable, and who rose from the ashes to become more powerful than anyone who ever hurt her. Stay until the end, because what she does with that power will change how you think about justice, accountability, and the hidden strength inside every person who has ever been underestimated. Value statement and lesson. Dear viewers, this story reveals a truth that too many people learn too late. The way someone treats you when they think you have no power to fight back tells you everything you need to know about their character. You will discover why documenting everything matters more than you think. You will learn how hidden strength can exist in the people everyone dismisses, and you will understand why cruelty always returns to those who practice it. This is not just entertainment. This is a survival guide disguised as a story. Story meaning, what lessons did this story teach you? If you were Emma, abandoned and humiliated by everyone who should have protected you, what would you have done differently? If you were Brandon, would you have treated a powerless woman with cruelty, never imagining she might one day hold your entire future in her hands? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. They say you do not really know someone until you see how they treat you when you are at your weakest. I was 8 months pregnant, alone in a hospital bed, and the man I had given everything to was screaming at the billing department that I was not worth $8,000. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, 3 weeks before everything fell apart, when I still believed in the life I had built with Brandon Matthews. My name is Emma Collins Matthews, and for 7 years, I thought I had married my soulmate. The evening of September 14th started like any other. I was in our kitchen, stirring a pot of beef stew that had been simmering for 3 hours. The recipe was my grandmother's, passed down through generations of Collins women who believed that food made with love could heal any wound. At 8 months pregnant, standing at the stove made my back ache and my feet swell, but I wanted everything to be perfect when Brandon came home. Perfect. That word defined my entire marriage. Perfect dinners, perfect house, perfect wife who never complained, never demanded, never questioned. I heard his car pull into the driveway at 6:47, exactly on schedule. Brandon was nothing if not punctual. I smoothed my maternity dress and checked my reflection in the microwave door, making sure my hair was neat and my smile was ready. He walked through the door, already looking at his phone. "Hey, babe," I called out, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "Dinner is almost ready." "How was your day?" Brandon grunted something that might have been fine as he dropped his briefcase by the door and continued scrolling through his messages. A smile flickered across his face at something he read, but it disappeared the moment he looked up at me. "What are we having?" "Your favorite. Beef stew with fresh bread." He walked past me without a kiss, without touching my belly, the way he used to in the early months of my pregnancy, without any acknowledgement that I had spent hours preparing a meal he used to rave about to his friends. "My mother's is better," he said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. "She uses more wine in the sauce. I will remember that for next time." The words came out automatically, the way they always did. Somewhere along the line, I had become an expert at swallowing my hurt and serving it back as sweetness. I told myself it was just pregnancy hormones making me sensitive. I told myself Brandon was stressed about work. I told myself 1,000 lies because the truth was too heavy to carry along with the baby growing inside me. Dinner passed in near silence, punctuated only by Brandon's phone buzzing every few minutes. Each time, that same secret smile would cross his face before he typed a quick response. "Who keeps texting you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Work stuff. The Henderson account is being difficult." I nodded, even though something in his tone felt wrong. Brandon had always been transparent about work stress before. He used to come home and unload every detail of his day, asking my advice on difficult clients and celebrating wins with me over glasses of wine I could no longer drink. When had that stopped? I tried to pinpoint the moment, but could not. The change had been so gradual, like water slowly eroding stone, that I had not noticed until the landscape of our marriage was unrecognizable. "I was thinking about names again," I said, desperate to connect with him about something. "What do you think about Grace for a girl?" Brandon looked up from his phone with barely concealed irritation. "We have time to figure that out. I am 8 months along. The baby could come any day now. The baby will come when it comes. We do not need to have every detail planned out right this second. The baby, not our baby, not our daughter." Looking back, I should have noticed the pattern. He never said our baby, always the baby or your pregnancy, like he was already distancing himself from the life we had created together. If your partner talks about your future child like it is your project alone, that is not nervousness. That is not cold feet. That is a red flag waving so hard it should knock you over. But I did not see it then. I was too busy being the perfect wife. After dinner, I was washing dishes when I heard a familiar voice call out from the backyard. "Emma, honey, you got a minute?" I smiled for the first time all evening. Diane Torres, my neighbor of 3 years, was leaning over the fence with a glass of red wine in her hand and concern in her eyes. Diane was 58 years old, twice divorced, and the most honest person I had ever met. She had been a family court paralegal for 30 years before retiring, and she had seen every possible variation of marriage gone wrong. Most people found her bluntness off-putting. I found it refreshing. I dried my hands and walked out to meet her at the fence. She immediately noticed my red-rimmed eyes. "Rough day?" she asked. "Just tired. Growing a human is exhausting." Diane took a long sip of her wine and studied me with the kind of look that made me feel like she could read my thoughts. "Honey, I have been divorced twice. The first husband was mean, the second was boring. Both of them stopped saying 'we' about 6 months before they left." She paused. How is Brandon doing with the we thing? I felt my throat tighten. He is just stressed about work. Diane nodded slowly. Mm-hmm. That is what I said too, both times. I wanted to argue with her, to defend my husband and my marriage and the life I had built. But standing there, in my grandmother's garden, 8 months pregnant, and more alone than I had ever felt, I could not find the words. Diane reached over the fence and squeezed my hand. You know where I am if you need me, anytime, day or night. You hear me? I hear you. That night, lying in bed next to Brandon, who was already asleep facing away from me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time he had told me he loved me. I could not. 3 weeks later, I would understand why. 3 weeks later, I would discover that while I was busy being the perfect wife, my husband had been busy building a life without me, and it would all begin with a trip to the hospital that would change everything. The contractions started at 7:32 on a Tuesday evening. I had been folding baby clothes in the nursery, arranging tiny onesies in the drawer for what must have been the 20th time. Nesting, the pregnancy books called it. That uncontrollable urge to prepare your home for the new arrival. I had scrubbed every surface, organized every closet, and triple-checked the hospital bag that had been packed by the door for 3 weeks. The first contraction felt like a tight band wrapping around my belly. I paused mid-fold, one hand resting on my stomach, waiting to see if it would happen again. It did. 7 minutes later. I reached for my phone to call Brandon, then hesitated. He was at a work dinner with an important client, or so he had told me. I did not want to bother him if this was another false alarm. After the third contraction, I knew this was real. The drive to Mercy General Hospital took 23 minutes. I drove myself, gripping the steering wheel through contractions that were now coming every 5 minutes. Brandon's phone had gone straight to voicemail 3 times. I left messages trying to keep my voice calm, trying not to let the fear bleed through. Hi, honey. It is me. I think I am in labor. I am heading to the hospital now. Call me back when you get this. Then 20 minutes later, when the pain had intensified, Brandon, please call me back. The contractions are getting stronger. I am at Mercy General now. And finally, as a nurse was wheeling me toward the maternity ward, Brandon, where are you? I really need you here. Please. The intake process felt endless. Forms to sign, questions to answer, monitors to attach. A kind-faced nurse named Sandra Miller helped me into a hospital gown and checked my vitals with practiced efficiency. Is there someone coming to be with you, Mrs. Matthews? She asked, glancing at the empty chair beside my bed. My husband, he should be here soon. Sandra nodded, but I caught something in her eyes. Not judgment exactly, but a weary recognition that made me wonder how many women she had seen in the same situation. Your contractions are 7 minutes apart, and you are dilated to 4 centimeters, she told me. Given your gestational diabetes and the baby's positioning, we need to monitor you closely. You are still in early labor, so we have time, but things can progress quickly. I nodded, gripping the bed rail as another contraction rolled through me. Is there anyone else I can call for you? A mother, a sister, a friend? There was no one. My parents had died in a car accident when I was 22. I had no siblings. I had given up most of my friendships when Brandon complained they took too much of my attention. I had quit my career as a corporate lawyer to support his ambitions. I had made myself small enough to fit into his life, and now I was realizing just how alone that had left me. Brandon finally arrived at 11:47 that night. I knew the exact time because I had been watching the clock for hours, counting the minutes between contractions and the minutes since my last unanswered call. He did not come to my room first. I heard him before I saw him, his voice carrying down the corridor from the billing department. I need to speak with whoever is in charge of preventing financial exploitation in this place. His tone was sharp, aggressive, so different from the charming salesman persona he wore in public. I am not signing a blank check for someone else's decisions. I want documentation of every single charge, and I want to know what is actually medically necessary versus what is optional. My heart sank. I was lying in a hospital bed, terrified and in pain, and my husband was arguing about money. When Brandon finally appeared in my doorway, his designer suit was still crisp from whatever business dinner had apparently taken priority over his wife's labor. His irritation was palpable. "How long is this going to take?" he asked. Not "how are you" or "how is the baby," but "how long is this going to take?" "I do not know. The doctor said it could be hours still." Brandon sighed heavily and pulled out his phone. "Great. I had a client meeting tomorrow morning that I am going to have to reschedule. I am sorry my labor is inconvenient for you." The words slipped out before I could stop them, sharper than anything I had ever said to him. His eyes narrowed. "Do not start with me, Emma. I am here, aren't I?" Dr. Patricia Lawson chose that moment to enter the room. She was an experienced obstetrician with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that immediately made me feel safer. She had been monitoring my high-risk pregnancy for months. "Mrs. Matthews, your contractions are progressing nicely. You are now at 5 centimeters. She checked her clipboard. "Given your gestational diabetes and the baby's positioning, I recommend we go ahead with the epidural and have the neonatologist on standby as a precaution. You are at 37 weeks. So we want to be prepared for anything." Brandon stepped forward. "How much is all this going to cost?" Dr. Lawson paused, clearly recalibrating her understanding of the situation. "For a complicated delivery with the interventions I am recommending, you are looking at somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000. Depending on how things progress." Brandon's response was immediate and devastating. "That is not happening. We will go with the minimum necessary intervention. She can manage the pain without the epidural. Natural childbirth is actually healthier anyway." I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Brandon, I am high risk. The doctor just said—" I heard what she said. "I also heard that the epidural is a recommendation, not a requirement." He turned to Dr. Lawson with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "My wife has always had a low pain tolerance. She will be fine." Dr. Lawson looked at me with barely concealed concern. "Miss Matthews, you do not need your husband's permission to authorize your own medical care," but Brandon was already steering her toward the door. "Thank you, doctor. We will let you know if we change our minds." After she left, I sat in stunned silence. The man I had married, the man I had given up my career for, the man whose child I was about to bring into the world, had just refused to pay for pain medication because $8,000 was too expensive. "Brandon, please," I whispered. "I am scared." He did not even look up from his phone. "You will be fine. Women have been having babies for thousands of years without epidurals." I signed my own consent forms that night with trembling hands. The nurse, Sandra, witnessed the interaction with a carefully neutral expression, but she placed a box of tissues on my bedside table and made eye contact that communicated both solidarity and professional limitation. "You have the right to advocate for your own medical care," Sandra said softly when Brandon stepped out to take a call. "Do you understand what I am saying?" I understood. But understanding and acting are two very different things when you have spent years making yourself small. At 1:23 in the morning, Brandon's mother arrived. Patricia Matthews swept into the hospital like a force of nature, her Chanel suit immaculate. Despite the late hour, her designer handbag coordinated perfectly with her expensive shoes. She was the HR director at a major corporation, and she wielded her corporate power like a weapon in every aspect of her life. She had never liked me. From the day Brandon brought me home, Patricia had made it clear that I was not good enough for her son, too poor, Too ordinary. Too much baggage with my dead parents and student loans. "What is happening here?" Patricia demanded, looking at me with undisguised contempt. "I am in labor." Patricia turned to Brandon, ignoring me entirely. "This is exactly the kind of manipulative behavior I warned you about. Suddenly there is a complicated delivery requiring expensive interventions. This is financial entrapment, and I did not raise you to be anyone's ATM." She finally addressed me directly, her voice loud enough to carry into adjacent rooms. "If you cannot afford the consequences of your reproductive choices, perhaps you should have considered that before trying to secure your position in this family through pregnancy." I opened my mouth to respond, but another contraction stole my breath. Sandra stepped between Patricia and my bed. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to lower your voice. This is a medical facility, and your behavior is creating a hostile environment for our patient." But Patricia Matthews was not a woman accustomed to being corrected by service staff. "I know my rights, and I know manipulation when I see it. This girl has been nothing but a financial drain since my son made the mistake of marrying her." The words hit like physical blows, each one landing in the places where I was already wounded. And I was only beginning to understand how bad this night would become. At 2:45 in the morning, Brandon's sister Melissa arrived. She was not there to support me. She was there to document my humiliation for her 10,000 social media followers. I watched in horror as Melissa positioned herself in the hallway outside my room, her phone held at the perfect selfie angle, and began what she called a live update. "Family drama alert," she announced to her audience. "My brother is literally being held hostage at the hospital right now because his wife decided to have a complicated pregnancy." She used air quotes around the word complicated. "This is why you always get a prenup, ladies. Always. The comments are going to be insane. I can already tell." 2,000 people watched my worst moment in real time. I could see the viewer count climbing on her screen, could hear the notification sounds of comments rolling in. Sandra tried to intervene. "Miss, you cannot film in the maternity ward. There are privacy regulations." "I am not filming patients," Melissa shot back. "I am in the hallway. Public space." She was technically correct, and she knew it. Her live stream continued for another 40 minutes, filled with commentary about gold diggers and baby traps and her poor brother who was just trying to do the right thing. Every word was being recorded by hundreds of strangers who had never met me, who would never know my side of the story. At 3:47 in the morning, between contractions that were now coming every 4 minutes, my iPad lit up with a notification. Brandon's Apple Watch was synced to my device. We had set it up years ago so I could track his workouts, and he could find his phone when he lost it. I had never thought to use it to monitor his messages, but there it was, right in front of me. A text from someone named Jessica. "Is she still at the hospital? When can you come back? I miss you." My blood ran cold. I watched as Brandon, sitting in the corner of my hospital room, scrolling through his phone, typed his response. "Few more hours. Gotta play the concerned husband until this is over. Then we can figure out the divorce timeline." The room tilted. I gripped the bed rails so hard my knuckles turned white. Divorce timeline. While I was in labor with his child, my husband was texting his mistress about when they could finalize their plan to leave me. I had to know more. With shaking hands, I scrolled back through the synced messages, through weeks and months of conversations between my husband and a woman I had never heard of. Jessica Moore, his assistant. The one he had hired 8 months ago after letting his previous assistant go for being too old and frumpy. I remembered thinking how pretty the new girl was, remembered the way Brandon had dismissed my concerns as jealousy. The messages painted a picture I could not unsee. hotel rooms, weekend getaways, pet names, and inside jokes. Plans for a future that did not include me. One message, sent 3 months ago, stopped my heart completely. Jessica, when are you going to tell her? Brandon, soon. Just waiting for the right moment. Can't leave while she's pregnant. That would look bad for the divorce settlement. Better to wait until after and claim irreconcilable differences. Jessica, smart. I love how you always think 3 steps ahead. Brandon, that's why you love me. Now, send me that picture again. I screenshotted everything. Page after page of evidence, time-stamped and documented, proving that my husband had been planning to abandon me and his child for months. Sandra noticed my distress immediately. Mrs. Matthews, your heart rate just spiked. Are you okay? I looked at her with tears streaming down my face. I just found out my husband is cheating on me, while I am in labor with his assistant. Sandra's expression shifted from professional concern to something deeper. She looked at Brandon, still oblivious in his corner, then back at me. I am going to pretend I did not hear that for legal reasons, she said softly, but I am going to document that your husband left the room during active labor and that his family member is live streaming from the maternity ward. For your medical records, which you have every right to request copies of later. I understood what she was doing. She was creating a paper trail, laying the groundwork for whatever legal battle might come. This nurse, this stranger, was protecting me more than my own husband ever had. Thank you, I whispered. At 4:30 in the morning, Brandon stood up and stretched. I need some air. This is taking forever. You are leaving? I asked, unable to keep the disbelief out of my voice. Just for a bit. My mom will stay with you. But Patricia did not stay. 10 minutes after Brandon left, she announced she needed coffee and disappeared down the hallway. Melissa had run out of content to live stream and gone home. I was alone. The contractions were coming every 3 minutes now. The pain was extraordinary, waves of agony that crested and crashed without relief. I had declined the epidural, under Brandon's pressure, and now I was experiencing the full force of unmedicated labor. I gripped Sandra's hand when she came to check on me. I cannot do this, I gasped. I cannot do this alone. You are not alone, Sandra's voice was firm. I am here. Dr. Lawson is on her way. And you can do this because you do not have a choice. That baby is coming whether you are ready or not. At 5:23 in the morning, my daughter came into the world screaming. Grace was born with strong lungs and a full head of dark hair, her tiny fists clenched, like she was already ready to fight. Dr. Lawson placed her on my chest, and for one perfect moment, nothing else mattered. Then the bleeding started. I felt it before the monitors caught it, a warm rush that should not have been there, a weakness spreading through my limbs. I need help in here, Dr. Lawson called out, her calm demeanor giving way to urgency. She has hemorrhaging. Get the crash cart ready. The next few minutes were a blur of medical intervention. More doctors rushed in. Someone took Grace from my arms. I heard the words postpartum hemorrhage and blood transfusion and emergency surgery through a haze of fear and exhaustion. Is my baby okay? I kept asking. Is Grace okay? She is perfect, Sandra assured me, pressing gauze against my body while doctors worked to stop the bleeding. You focus on staying with us. I do not remember much after that. The emergency intervention, the blood transfusion, the slow stabilization, as my body was put back together. I drifted in and out of consciousness, always reaching for Grace, always asking where Brandon was. He never came. At 8 in the morning, 3 hours after I had nearly bled to death, 3 hours after his daughter was born, Brandon finally reappeared. His clothes were rumpled, different from the suit he had worn the night before. He smelled like perfume that was not mine. His first words as he looked at the mountain of medical equipment surrounding my bed were not about me or about the baby sleeping peacefully in the bassinet. Jesus Christ, $47,000. He was holding the itemized bill that had been left on the visitor chair. Brandon, I almost died. And it cost $47,000 apparently. He ran his hand through his hair in frustration. We need to talk to a lawyer. This is outrageous. I stared at this man I had married, this stranger who looked at near-fatal quick complications and saw only a bill to be negotiated. Do you want to meet your daughter? Brandon glanced at the bassinet like it contained a minor inconvenience rather than a miracle. Later, I need to make some calls, figure out how we are going to handle this mess. He walked out without holding Grace, without kissing me, without acknowledging that his wife and child had survived a traumatic birth while he was somewhere else doing something he would never admit to. I lay in that hospital bed, watching my newborn daughter sleep, and I made myself a promise. I was done being the perfect wife. I was done making myself small. Whatever came next, I would face it with my eyes open and my evidence documented. I just did not know yet how much worse things would get before they got better. 2 weeks after I nearly died giving birth, alone, I was sitting at Diane Torres's kitchen table with a cup of tea I could not drink and a stack of documents I could not stop reading. So, let me get this straight, Diane said, refilling her wine glass, despite it being 11 in the morning. Your husband left you at the hospital during an emergency birth. His mother called you a gold digger in front of the nursing staff. His sister live-streamed your labor to 10,000 strangers. You discovered he has been cheating on you for at least 8 months, and now he wants you to pay half of the medical bills for almost dying. That about sums it up. Diane took a long sip of wine. Honey, I have seen a lot of bad husbands in my 30 years working family court. Your Brandon is a special kind of terrible. Grace stirred in the portable bassinet beside me, and I automatically reached out to rock her back to sleep. 2 weeks old, and she was already the best thing that had ever happened to me. I had moved in with Diane the day after I was discharged from the hospital. Brandon had made it clear I was not welcome in our marital home until I apologized for making a scene about the medical bills and agreed to sign papers acknowledging that the expensive interventions were my choice alone. I had refused. Here is what you need to do, Diane said, sliding a legal pad across the table. First, separate your finances. Today. Before he can hide anything or freeze you out. Second, request copies of your tax returns for the last 3 years. You are entitled to them, and you need to know exactly what assets exist. Third, start documenting everything. I held up my phone. Already done. I have screenshots of his affair texts, recordings of his mother's comments at the hospital, and Sandra helped me get copies of the medical records showing he left during active labor. Diane's eyebrows rose with approval. Smart girl. You might actually survive this. Over the next few days, Diane walked me through the basics of protecting myself in a divorce I had not yet filed. She explained concepts I should have known from my time as a lawyer, but had never imagined applying to my own life. Most women do not know this, she told me, but if your spouse refuses to pay marital medical debt, you can document it. It is financial abandonment. Some judges take that very seriously in divorce proceedings, especially when there is a newborn involved. She also helped me find a lawyer. Margaret Sullivan was everything Brandon's fancy corporate attorneys were not. She was a 62-year-old woman who had built her career fighting for mothers who could not afford the big firms. Her office was modest, her fees were sliding scale, and her reputation for winning impossible cases was legendary. Tell me everything, Margaret said at our first meeting. Do not leave anything out, no matter how small or embarrassing it seems. So I told her about the hospital abandonment, the affair, the financial abuse, the years of small cruelties that had added up to an unbearable weight. Margaret took notes in a leather-bound notebook, occasionally asking questions that cut right to the heart of matters. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with eyes that had seen 1,000 cases just like mine. Mrs. Matthews, you have an incredibly strong case. The hospital documentation alone is damning. The affair evidence is solid, and his family's public behavior gives us additional ammunition. She paused. But I need you to understand something. You are going up against a man who has more money, more connections, and fewer scruples than you. This is going to get ugly before it gets beautiful, I know. Do you? Margaret leaned forward. Because right now you have nothing. No income, no assets you can access, no home of your own. He has your house, your car, your joint accounts. If he decides to fight dirty, and men like this always fight dirty, he can make your life very difficult for a very long time. I looked at Grace sleeping peacefully in her carrier. I have her, and I have the truth. That has to count for something. Margaret smiled grimly. In a fair world, it would count for everything. In family court, it counts for about 40%. The other 60% is money, lawyers, and who can outlast the other. Despite her warnings, the first few weeks went better than I had dared to hope. Margaret filed for emergency custody, presenting evidence of Brandon's abandonment during the birth and his complete lack of involvement in Grace's care since. The judge granted temporary primary custody to me, with Brandon receiving standard visitation rights. She filed for temporary spousal support, arguing that I had given up my career to support Brandon's ambitions and now had no income while caring for a newborn. The judge agreed, ordering Brandon to pay $1,500 per month until the divorce was finalized. She also requested forensic accounting of our marital assets, which Brandon's lawyer opposed, but the judge approved. For 2 glorious weeks, I thought the worst was over. I had evidence. I had a lawyer. I had my daughter. Justice would prevail, and Brandon would pay for what he had done. I actually believed it was going to be that simple. Then Brandon hired Robert Blackwell. Blackwell was known in legal circles as the Rottweiler. He was a divorce attorney who specialized in protecting wealthy men from the consequences of their own behavior. His tactics were legendary for being brutal, technically legal, and devastatingly effective. The first sign of what was coming arrived in the form of an emergency motion filed on a Friday afternoon, timed perfectly to ruin my weekend. Margaret called me with her voice carefully controlled. "Emma, I need you to come to my office. Brandon is countersuing for primary custody." "What? That is insane. He has not even seen Grace since the hospital." "I know. But Blackwell is claiming you are mentally unstable." "Mentally unstable?" "He is using your texts about the affair as evidence of paranoid behavior. He is citing your hemorrhage as a risk factor for postpartum psychosis, and he is claiming that you abandoned the marital home to live with a stranger instead of seeking reconciliation." My blood ran cold. That is all lies. I know it is. But Blackwell does not need to prove anything is true. He just needs to create enough doubt that a judge orders an evaluation. And once there is an evaluation on record, it follows you through the entire case. Margaret was right. The hearing was a disaster. Brandon's lawyer painted me as an unstable woman who had imagined an affair that never happened, who had abandoned her marriage over a simple misunderstanding, who was now using her baby as a weapon against a loving father who just wanted to be part of his daughter's life. The judge, an older man who seemed skeptical of my carefully documented evidence, ordered a psychiatric evaluation for me. He also adjusted custody to 50-50 pending the evaluation, gave Brandon the house since he had stable employment and I was staying with a neighbor, and declared the medical debt a marital responsibility. I walked out of that courtroom with nothing but the clothes on my back and a court order to prove I was not crazy. As we passed Brandon in the hallway, He leaned close and whispered something that only I could hear. "Did you really think you could beat me, Emma? I own you." That night, sitting in Diane's kitchen with Grace sleeping against my chest, I finally let myself cry. "I did everything right," I sobbed. "I documented everything. I got a lawyer, I went to their evaluation, and I am still losing." Diane sat down across from me and poured herself another glass of wine. "Honey, let me tell you something nobody wants to hear. The system is not designed for justice. It is designed for whoever has more money to fight longer. And right now, that is not you." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "But that does not mean you stop fighting. It just means you fight smarter." I did not know then how right she would be. I did not know that the fight was about to get much worse before it got better. And I certainly did not know that a letter from a lawyer I had never heard of was about to change everything. The next 2 months were a masterclass in how the legal system could be weaponized against vulnerable women. Robert Blackwell attacked from every angle, simultaneously, each motion designed to drain my resources, destroy my credibility, and break my spirit. First came the financial strangulation. Brandon's lawyer filed a motion claiming I might be hiding assets. Despite having access to all our financial records and knowing perfectly well that I had $847 to my name, the judge granted a temporary freeze on my personal bank account pending investigation. I could not buy diapers for Grace without asking Diane for money. Then came the custody manipulation. Brandon exercised his court-ordered visitation rights for the first time 3 weeks after the hearing. He picked up Grace on Friday evening and returned her Sunday night, as the schedule required. What he did during that time made my blood boil. Brandon did not care for Grace himself. He handed her off to Jessica Moore, his mistress, the moment he left my sight. Jessica posted photographs on social media of herself bottle-feeding my daughter with the caption, "Bonding with my bonus daughter," with a heart emoji. I saw the posts through a mutual friend who sent them to me with an apologetic message. I called Margaret immediately. "Can we use this against him?" I demanded. "He is letting his affair partner care for our child during his custody time." Margaret sighed. "Unfortunately, no. He is allowed to have a girlfriend, and he is allowed to let other people help with childcare. As long as Grace is safe and fed and returned on time, there is nothing legally we can do." "But she is the woman he cheated on me with." "I know, and morally, it is reprehensible. But family court does not legislate morality. It legislates custody schedules." Finally came the public humiliation. Melissa Matthews had not forgotten about me. Her live stream from the hospital had gotten 100,000 views, and she had found a new hobby in making my life miserable. The gold digger tried to take my brother to court. Melissa announced to her followers in a video titled, "The Truth About Emma Matthews." Here is what you should know about this woman. The video included screenshots of my texts to Brandon, taken out of context to make me look paranoid and controlling. It featured interviews with Brandon's colleagues, who called me difficult and antisocial. It painted a picture of a scheming woman who had trapped a successful man with a pregnancy and was now trying to steal his money. 200,000 views. Thousands of comments calling me names I will not repeat. My face, my name, my worst moments, all public, all permanent. I deleted my social media accounts, but the damage was done. Potential employers who searched my name found Melissa's content first. Old friends sent awkward messages asking if I was okay. Strangers recognized me at the grocery store. The psychiatric evaluation took place 6 weeks after the custody hearing. Dr. William Harrison was a court-appointed psychiatrist who had been evaluating family court cases for 20 years. He was professional and thorough, asking questions about my mental state, my marriage, my plans for Grace. I answered everything honestly. I was exhausted, yes. Scared, certainly. Angry about what Brandon had done to me, absolutely. But I was not unstable. I was a woman responding normally to abnormal circumstances. Dr. Harrison listened, took notes, and promised his report would be fair. 2 weeks later, the results came back. Margaret called me with news that should have been good, but somehow was not. The psychiatric evaluation came back clean, she said. No diagnosis, no recommendations for treatment. You passed. That is great news, right? Margaret hesitated. It should be, but Blackwell is spinning it anyway. The report says you show signs of acute stress related to marital dissolution. It recommends continued monitoring, just as standard language for anyone going through a difficult divorce. Blackwell is telling the judge that even the psychiatrist thinks you need to be watched. The next hearing was worse than the first. Despite passing the psychiatric evaluation, the judge ruled that custody would remain 50-50. He added a requirement that I attend parenting classes, which felt like a slap in the face, given that Brandon had barely held our daughter since she was born. And because Brandon had stable housing while I was staying with a neighbor, he was awarded slightly more overnights. I was losing my daughter to a man who had abandoned us both, and there was nothing I could do about it. That night, I sat in Diane's kitchen and stared at the wall. How is this possible? I asked. How is he winning when he is the one who did everything wrong? Diane refilled her wine glass with the weariness of someone who had seen this story play out 1,000 times. Because the system is not designed for justice. On the all that, this, honey. I told you that. It is designed for whoever can afford to fight the longest. Brandon has money. He has a fancy lawyer. He has a family willing to lie for him. You have documentation and righteousness, and unfortunately, those do not pay legal bills. She paused. Do you have anything else? Any other resources? Family money? Secret savings? Anything? I shook my head. Nothing. But even as I said it, I thought about something I had tried not to think about for years. My biological father. Richard Collins had abandoned my mother when I was 2 years old. He had never paid child support, never visited, never acknowledged my existence. My mother had changed our name and moved us across the country to escape him. He had been wealthy, she once told me. Old money, family business. But he had chosen his empire over his daughter. I had not thought about him in years. As far as I knew, he was either dead or simply indifferent to my existence. But sitting in Diane's kitchen, watching my world collapse around me, I wondered for the first time if there was anything left of the man who had given me life and nothing else. 3 days later, I found out. A registered letter arrived for me at Diane's address. The envelope was expensive, cream-colored stationery, the kind used by law firms that charge $500 an hour. The return address read, Whitmore and Associates, Estate Law. I opened it with trembling hands. Dear Ms. Collins, we represent the estate of Richard Collins, deceased. Our records indicate you are the primary beneficiary of Mr. Collins' estate, including majority ownership of Collins Holdings, LLC. Please contact our office immediately to discuss this matter in detail. I read the letter 3 times before the words made sense. My father was dead. He had left me everything. And according to this letter, everything was a $200 million company. I looked up at Diane, who was watching me with concern. What is it? She asked. You look like you have seen a ghost. In a way, I had. I think my whole life just changed. Charles Whitmore's law office was nothing like the sterile corporate firms I had encountered during my brief career as a lawyer. It occupied the top floor of a historic building downtown, all dark wood, paneling, and leather-bound books. The kind of space where fortunes had been made and lost for generations. The attorney himself matched his surroundings. He was 67 years old, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, with the quietly confident manner of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything. "Please, have a seat, Ms. Collins." He gestured to a leather chair across from his mahogany desk. "I imagine you have a great many questions." I sat down carefully, Grace asleep in her carrier beside me. "I have nothing but questions, Mr. Whitmore. Then let me start at the beginning." He opened a thick folder on his desk. "Your father, Richard Collins, died of pancreatic cancer 4 months ago. He spent the last 2 years of his life trying to find you." Trying to find me? I could not keep the bitterness out of my voice. He knew exactly where I was. He abandoned us. Charles nodded slowly. "I understand why you would believe that. Your mother told you that story, and she had her reasons. But the truth is more complicated." He slid a document across the desk. "This is a private investigator's report from 1997. Your father hired him to locate you and your mother after she left." I scanned the pages with growing disbelief. Photographs of apartments my mother and I had lived in, school records with my name, employment histories, utility bills, forwarding addresses. "He was tracking us. He was trying to find you," Charles corrected gently. "Your mother was very good at disappearing. She changed your name, moved every 18 months, paid cash for everything she could. Richard spent over $200,000 on investigators over 15 years. Why did she run?" Charles hesitated. "That is not my story to tell completely. What I can say is that your parents' relationship was complicated. Your mother came from a troubled background. Richard came from old money, with expectations. When they met, it was a perfect storm of passion and poor decisions." He paused. "Your mother became convinced that Richard would take you from her, that his family's lawyers would prove she was an unfit mother, and that she would never see you again. So she ran. And he let her? He tried everything legal. But courts in those days were different. A mother who had not been accused of abuse or neglect, who simply wanted to raise her child away from her father? The law favored her. Richard was advised that pursuing custody across state lines would be expensive, traumatic for you, and likely unsuccessful. So he gave up. He stepped back, Charles said carefully. He believed that forcing himself into your life, against your mother's wishes, would cause more harm than good. He was wrong. He knew he was wrong by the end. That is why he left you everything. He slid another document across the desk, this one much thicker. This is the summary of your inheritance. Collins Holdings, LLC, 51% ownership. Personal investment accounts totaling $12 million. Real estate holdings worth another $3 million. And this. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written on it in handwriting I had never seen before. That is a letter your father wrote you before he died. You should read it when you are ready. I held the envelope like it might burn me. My entire understanding of my childhood, my identity, my father, was crumbling. There is something else you need to know, Charles continued. Collins Holdings owns several subsidiary companies. One of them is Matthews Regional Sales Corporation. I froze. What did you say? Matthews Regional. Charles consulted his notes. It appears your husband has been the regional sales director there for 6 years, and your mother-in-law, Patricia Matthews, has been the HR director at Collins Holdings' main office for 15 years. The room tilted. My husband worked for my father's company. My mother-in-law worked directly for an enterprise I now owned. Does anyone at the company know about me? Number Richard kept your existence completely private. He had planned to introduce you eventually, but the cancer progressed faster than expected. As far as anyone at Collins Holdings knows, the majority owner is an anonymous trust. Charles leaned forward. Miss Collins, You now control a $200 million company. You are the employer of your husband and your mother-in-law. What you do with that information is entirely up to you. I sat in silence for a long moment, Grace stirring in her carrier beside me. A month ago, I had been a woman with nothing. No money, no job, no home. My husband was using the court system to take my daughter, and there was nothing I could do to stop him. Now I owned everything. That night, I told Diane everything. She listened without interrupting, working her way through an entire bottle of wine while I explained about Richard Collins, the inheritance, the connection to Brandon's employer. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," she finally said. "The man who called you worthless at the hospital, the man who is trying to take your daughter, the man who has been making your life a living hell for months, works for a company you now own?" "Yes." "And his mother, who called you a gold digger in front of the nursing staff, works for you too?" "Yes." Diane burst out laughing. "Oh, honey, this is beautiful. This is poetic justice served on a silver platter." I did not share her amusement. "What am I supposed to do with this?" "Whatever you want," Diane said. "You could fire them both tomorrow. You could shut down the entire division. You could make their lives as miserable as they have made yours. Or you could be smart about it." Diane's laughter faded into something more serious. "Look, I have seen a lot of people come into money or power and immediately use it for revenge. It feels good for about 5 minutes, and then the consequences catch up with them." She leaned forward. "You have a custody case pending. If you act emotionally, you play right into Blackwell's narrative that you are unstable and vindictive. But if you act strategically, if you use this power to uncover the truth rather than to punish people—" I nodded slowly. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting you do not reveal that you own the company. Not yet. Instead, you use your access to find out what Brandon has really been doing. Because I guarantee you, a man who treats his wife the way he has treated you is cutting corners somewhere else too." She was right. I called Margaret the next morning and told her everything. The attorney was silent for a long moment after I finished. "This changes everything," she finally said. "But we have to be careful. You cannot use your ownership position to directly retaliate in the divorce. That is considered bad faith and could actually hurt your case. So what can I do?" "You can conduct a normal business review of the company you just inherited. If during that review you happen to discover that certain employees have been engaging in misconduct, well, that is just good management." She paused. "Here is something most people do not know. If your spouse has been hiding income or assets during divorce proceedings, and you can prove it, judges can award you a larger share of marital property and sanction them for fraud on the court. The documentation you have been doing is about to become very valuable." I hung up the phone and looked at Grace, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. For months, I had been playing defense, reacting to Brandon's attacks, scrambling to survive each new assault. It was time to start playing offense. I just had no idea how deep Brandon's deception really went. The Collins Holdings corporate offices occupied 3 floors of a glass tower downtown. I had passed the building dozens of times during my marriage without ever knowing what was inside, without knowing that my father had built this empire while searching for the daughter he could not find. I entered through a private entrance Charles had arranged, taking a service elevator to the executive floor where I could review company records without being seen by general employees. The first day was overwhelming. Collins Holdings was massive, with divisions spanning real estate development, commercial property management, and a dozen subsidiary companies including Matthews' regional sales. But I was not there to learn about commercial property management. I was there to find out what Brandon had been hiding. It took me 3 days to find it. 3 days of reading financial reports, cross-referencing expense accounts, and following money trails that should not have existed. Brandon Matthews had been embezzling from Matthews Regional Sales for 3 years. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity: fake vendor accounts that existed only on paper, inflated expense reports for client entertainment that never happened, kickbacks from contractors who received preferential treatment in exchange for cash payments. $340,000 had disappeared into accounts I traced to a shell company registered in Brandon's cousin's name. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was where the money had gone. Brandon had not used the embezzled funds for our family. He had not paid off debt or invested in our future or even bought himself expensive toys. He had used it to build a secret life with Jessica Moore, an apartment I had never seen, rented under her name, but paid for with his stolen money. A car she drove, financed through the shell company, jewelry, vacations, everything needed to maintain a mistress in the lifestyle she expected. And in the financial records, I found a receipt from 6 months ago that made me understand exactly how long this betrayal had been planned. An engagement ring, $14,000. Purchased the same month I told Brandon I was pregnant. He had been planning to leave me before our daughter was even born, but the embezzlement was only the beginning. The deeper I dug, the more I found. Patricia Matthews, my mother-in-law, had known about the affair from the beginning. I found email exchanges between her and Brandon discussing how to hide the relationship from me, how to structure the eventual divorce to minimize his financial exposure. She had also been actively protecting him at work, internal audit requests that mysteriously disappeared. Complaints from employees who noticed discrepancies in Brandon's expense reports, filed and forgotten. A comprehensive cover-up orchestrated from the HR department she controlled. But the most damning discovery came from Brandon's work calendar. The night I went into labor, the night he claimed to be at a business dinner with an important client, his calendar showed no meetings scheduled. His expense account showed no client entertainment purchases. Instead, his corporate credit card had been used at a hotel 3 miles from the hospital, a hotel where, according to check-in records I found in the corporate system, Jessica Moore had been a registered guest. He had been with her while I labored alone. He had been with her while our daughter was born. He had been with her while I nearly bled to death. I printed everything. Hundreds of pages of evidence documenting embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and betrayal. Then I called Margaret. "We have a problem," I said when she answered. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where my husband is going to prison, and I have to decide whether to send him there before or after our custody hearing tomorrow." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Tell me everything," Margaret said. So I did. The embezzlement, the cover-up, the secret life with Jessica, the conspiracy between Brandon and his mother, the conflict of interest I had discovered when researching Robert Blackwell, Brandon's attorney, who apparently also represented Matthews Regional in some business matters. When I finished, Margaret let out a low whistle. "Emma, this is incredible. This changes everything about your case." "But there is a problem," I said. "If I reveal that I am the owner of Collins Holdings, Blackwell will argue I entrapped Brandon somehow, that I set this all up to destroy him." "That is a risk," Margaret agreed. "But here's the thing. You do not have to reveal that you own the company. You just have to reveal what Brandon did. The evidence speaks for itself. You can explain how you obtained it later, if necessary." She paused. "The real question is timing. The custody hearing is tomorrow. If we introduce this evidence, Brandon's stable employment argument collapses. His whole case is built on the idea that he is a responsible, financially secure father. Fraud and embezzlement kind of undermine that narrative. What if the judge does not allow it? What if it looks like I am ambushing him? It is a risk. But, Emma, if we do not introduce this evidence and Brandon gets primary custody, unwinding that decision later will be 10 times harder than getting it right the first time. She was right. I knew she was right. But I also knew that tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. That night, I sat in Diane's kitchen, with Grace sleeping in my arms, and made the hardest decision of my life. For months, I had been playing defense. I had been reacting to Brandon's attacks, scrambling to survive, hoping the system would eventually recognize the truth. Tomorrow, I would stop running. Tomorrow, I would fight back. Whatever the consequences, the custody hearing was scheduled for 9 in the morning. At 11 the night before, I was still sitting at Diane's kitchen table, surrounded by evidence that could destroy my husband's life. "You know what you have to do," Diane said, watching me stare at the stack of documents. "Why are you hesitating?" "Because once I do this, there is no going back." "Honey, there was no going back the moment he left you at that hospital." Diane poured herself a glass of wine, her third of the evening. "You did not start this war, but you can finish it." She was right. I knew she was right, but some part of me, the part that had spent 7 years being the perfect wife, that part still hesitated. What if I am wrong? What if this makes things worse? What if Grace grows up knowing that her mother destroyed her father? Diane set down her glass and looked at me with the same hard wisdom that had guided me through the worst months of my life. "Let me tell you something I learned from 30 years in family court. Children do not need perfect parents. They need honest ones. Grace will grow up knowing the truth about her father one way or another. The question is whether she learns it from court documents now or from therapy sessions later." She reached across the table and took my hand. "You are not destroying Brandon. You are holding him accountable. There is a difference. If he did not want consequences, he should not have committed crimes." At midnight, I called Margaret. "I am ready," I said. "Let us do this." "Good." Margaret's voice was calm and professional despite the late hour. "I am filing the emergency motion now. Newly discovered evidence of financial fraud that materially affects custody considerations. We will have the documentation ready to present first thing tomorrow." What if the judge does not accept it? Then we appeal. We keep fighting. But Emma, the evidence you have found is overwhelming. Any reasonable judge will have to consider it. I hung up the phone and looked at Grace, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. In a few hours, everything would change. Either I would finally get justice, or I would watch my husband use his expensive lawyers to wriggle out of consequences one more time. But at least I was no longer waiting to be rescued. At least I was fighting back. The morning of the hearing, I put on the nicest dress I had left, a simple black sheath that Diane had bought me because all my good clothes were still at Brandon's house. I styled my hair carefully, applied makeup that made me look professional rather than grieving, and reminded myself that I was not just a victim anymore. I was the majority owner of a $200 million company. I was a woman with evidence that could send my husband to prison. I was a mother who would do anything to protect her daughter. Margaret met me outside the courthouse with a thick folder of documents and a determined expression. "Are you ready?" she asked. "No, but I am going to do it anyway." She smiled grimly. That is the spirit. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and institutional, with the particular smell of bureaucracy that all government buildings seem to share. Brandon was already there with Blackwell, the two of them conferring in low voices at the defense table. He looked confident, smug even. He had won every round so far, and he clearly expected today to be no different. When he saw me enter, he smirked. That smirk would haunt my dreams for years, not because it was cruel, though it was, but because of what it revealed about how completely he had underestimated me. Patricia was in the gallery, dressed in her usual corporate armor. Jessica sat beside her, a supportive girlfriend attending her partner's difficult legal proceeding. They were whispering to each other when I walked in, probably discussing how quickly this would be over. None of them noticed the extra folder in Margaret's briefcase. None of them knew what was coming. Judge Eleanor Crawford entered at exactly 9 o'clock. She was a formidable woman in her 60s, with silver hair, pulled back in a severe bun, and the kind of face that suggested she had seen every variation of human deception and was not impressed by any of it. This is the matter of Matthews versus Matthews. Custody hearing, she announced. Is counsel ready to proceed? Blackwell stood with theatrical confidence. The petitioner is ready, Your Honor. Margaret rose as well. The respondent is ready. However, before we proceed, I have an emergency motion to bring to the court's attention. The judge's eyebrows rose. An emergency motion on the day of a scheduled hearing? Yes, Your Honor. My client has discovered new evidence that is materially relevant to the custody determination. Evidence of financial fraud by Mr. Matthews that undermines his claims of stable employment and financial responsibility. Brandon's smirk disappeared. Blackwell was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We have had no opportunity to review this supposed evidence. This is clearly a desperate attempt to derail proceedings that have been properly scheduled for weeks. Judge Crawford held up her hand for silence. I will decide what is and is not appropriate in my courtroom, Mr. Blackwell. She turned to Margaret. Ms. Sullivan. What is the nature of this evidence? Margaret handed copies to the bailiff for distribution. Your Honor, we have documentation showing that Mr. Matthews has been systematically embezzling from his employer for 3 years, approximately $340,000 in fraudulent expenses, fake vendor accounts, and kickbacks. This is not a case of minor expense report padding. This is organized financial fraud. The courtroom went silent. I watched Brandon's face cycle through emotions like a slot machine. Confusion, recognition, fear, panic. He looked at me, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw something other than contempt in his eyes. He saw that I knew everything, and he was terrified. Your Honor, this is outrageous, Blackwell sputtered. Where did she even get these documents? This is clearly stolen property, illegally obtained information that cannot be admitted as evidence. Judge Crawford was studying the first page of the documentation with careful attention. The source of evidence is a matter we can address, but first, I want to understand what we are dealing with here. Ms. Sullivan, please continue. Margaret stood at the podium with the confidence of an attorney who knew she had an unbeatable hand. Your Honor, the documents before you include 3 years of financial records from Matthews Regional Sales Corporation, a subsidiary of Collins Holdings, LLC. These records show a systematic pattern of fraud, including fake vendor invoices totaling over $200,000, inflated expense reports for client entertainment that never occurred, and kickback payments from contractors routed through a shell company registered to Mr. Matthews' cousin. She flipped to a new section of the documentation. We also have evidence that this money was used to maintain a secret relationship with his assistant, Jessica Moore. An apartment, a vehicle, jewelry, and significantly, an engagement ring purchased 6 months ago. The same month, Mrs. Matthews informed her husband she was pregnant. I heard Patricia gasp from the gallery. Jessica was crying softly. Brandon was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles had turned white. Furthermore, Margaret continued, we have evidence that Patricia Matthews, who serves as HR director at Collins Holdings, actively covered up her son's fraudulent activities, internal audit requests that disappeared, employee complaints that were buried, a comprehensive conspiracy to protect Mr. Matthews from the consequences of his crimes. Judge Crawford looked up from the documents with an expression I could not read. Mr. Blackwell, do you have a response? Blackwell was sweating visibly. Your Honor, I need time to review these allegations with my client. This is the first I am hearing of any of this, and I cannot possibly respond without proper preparation. The first you are hearing, Margaret interjected. That is interesting, Mr. Blackwell, because these documents also show that your firm has represented Matthews Regional Sales Corporation in various business matters over the past 5 years. Matters that would have given you access to the very financial records that now show your current client committing fraud. Would you like to explain that conflict of interest to the court? Blackwell's face went pale. Judge Crawford set down the documents and fixed both attorneys with a stern gaze. I am going to take a 15-minute recess to review these materials more thoroughly. When we return, I expect clear answers about how this evidence was obtained and what it means for these proceedings. And Mr. Blackwell, I strongly suggest you use this time to consider whether you can continue representing Mr. Matthews given the conflict of interest that has just been raised. She stood. Court is in recess. The next 15 minutes were the longest of my life. Margaret and I sat at our table in silence. There was nothing more to say, nothing more to do. The evidence was in the judge's hands. Either she would consider it or she would not. Brandon tried to approach me once, probably to threaten or beg, but Blackwell physically stopped him. Do not say a word to her, the attorney hissed. Anything you say can be used against you. Brandon's eyes met mine across the courtroom. The confident predator who had tormented me for months was gone. In his place was a frightened man who had just realized that his carefully constructed world was crumbling. I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no triumph, no relief, just tired, so incredibly tired. When Judge Crawford returned, her expression had changed. The neutral judicial mask had given way to something colder. I have reviewed the evidence, she announced. Before we proceed, I need to address how Mrs. Matthews obtained these documents. Margaret stood. Your Honor, these documents were obtained from Collins Holdings' internal systems by my client in her capacity as the majority shareholder and owner of Collins Holdings, LLC. She inherited this position 3 weeks ago following the death of her father, Richard Collins, the company's founder. The silence that followed was absolute. Brandon made a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. Patricia Matthews looked like she might faint. Jessica had stopped crying and was staring at me with an expression of dawning horror. And from the gallery, I heard Melissa Matthews whisper to no one in particular, "That is not possible." But it was possible. It was true, and everyone in that courtroom was just beginning to understand what it meant. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Judge Crawford said slowly. Mrs. Matthews is the majority owner of the company where her husband works and where his mother serves as HR director. That is correct, Your Honor, and she discovered evidence of her husband's fraud during a legitimate business review of her own company? Also correct. The judge turned to Brandon with an expression that could have frozen water. Mr. Matthews, do you have anything to say? Brandon opened his mouth, but only a strangled sound came out. Blackwell stepped in. Your Honor, I need to confer with my client. This is completely unexpected. We had no idea, there has to be some explanation. The explanation, Margaret said quietly, is that Mr. Matthews spent 2 years treating his wife like she was worthless because he believed she was powerless. He abandoned her at the hospital during an emergency birth. He refused to pay for pain medication because $8,000 was too expensive. He let his mother publicly humiliate her while she was in labor, and all along he was stealing from her company to fund his affair. She paused. Your Honor, my client is not asking for revenge. She is asking for accountability. Mr. Matthews built his entire custody case on the claim that he is a stable, financially responsible father. The evidence before you proves that claim is a lie constructed on fraud and deception. Judge Crawford nodded slowly. Mr. Blackwell, given the conflict of interest that has been revealed, I am going to ask you to withdraw from this case, Mr. Matthews will need to retain new counsel for any future proceedings. Blackwell looked relieved. Yes, Your Honor. Now. The judge turned her full attention to Brandon. I have been on this bench for 22 years. I have seen lying, manipulation, and bad faith from every possible angle, but I have rarely seen such a comprehensive display of deception as what I am looking at today. She held up the documents. You committed fraud against your employer. You used the stolen money to maintain an affair. You let your mother cover up your crimes from a position of trust. And then you had the audacity to come into my courtroom and claim that your wife, the victim of your abandonment and cruelty, was mentally unstable and unfit to raise her own child. Mr. Matthews, I do not make custody decisions based on emotion. I make them based on evidence. And the evidence before me shows that you are not fit to have unsupervised contact with anyone, let alone a defenseless infant. Brandon started to speak, but the judge cut him off. I am awarding full custody of the minor child to Emma Collins Matthews, effective immediately. You will have supervised visitation only, at a time and location to be determined by the court. You will pay 100% of the medical debt incurred during your daughter's birth. You will pay your wife's legal fees in full, and I am forwarding this evidence to the appropriate federal authorities for investigation of the fraud charges. She banged her gavel. Additionally, I am issuing a recommendation to Family Services regarding your fitness as a parent. I strongly suggest you retain a criminal defense attorney immediately because you are going to need one. Brandon lunged to his feet. This is not fair. She set me up. This whole thing was a trap. Two bailiffs moved toward him as his voice rose. She knew who she was the whole time. This is entrapment. I want to file a complaint. I want... Mr. Matthews? Judge Crawford's voice cut through his shouting like a blade. You are in contempt of court. Bailiffs, remove him. As they escorted Brandon out of the courtroom, still screaming about injustice and traps, and how none of this was his fault, I sat perfectly still and watched the man I had married be dragged away in handcuffs. It was over. I had won. Margaret squeezed my shoulder. Are you okay? I do not know yet. Ask me again tomorrow. In the gallery, Patricia Matthews was frozen in her seat, unable to process what had just happened. I caught Margaret's eye and nodded slightly. Margaret walked over to Patricia with a document in her hand. Ms. Matthews, Emma would like you to know that your employment at Collins Holdings is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. You will find the detailed termination letter in this envelope, along with information about your legal rights and obligations. Patricia took the envelope with trembling hands. You cannot do this, she whispered. I have worked there for 15 years. And for 15 years, you have been using your position to harm other people, I said, standing and walking toward her. You covered up your son's crimes. You blocked employees who tried to report problems. And you spent 2 years making my life miserable because you thought I had no power to fight back. I paused in front of her. I want you to know that I am not doing this for revenge. I am doing this because you are unfit for a position of trust. The same reason I will be restructuring the entire HR department next week to ensure this kind of abuse never happens again. Patricia's face crumpled. I was just protecting my son. No, you were protecting yourself. There is a difference. I turned to Jessica, who was still crying in her seat. I have nothing to say to you, I told her. You made your choices. Now you get to live with them. But for what it is worth, the man you thought was going to marry you was never going to leave his comfortable life. You were just entertainment. I walked out of the courtroom with my head held high, leaving behind the wreckage of a family that had tried to destroy me. Grace was waiting with Diane in the hallway, my daughter's tiny face, peaceful and unaware of the battle that had just been won on her behalf. I picked her up and held her close. It is over, sweetheart, I whispered. We are going to be okay now. And for the first time in months, I actually believed it. The view from my office on the 32nd floor of Collins Holdings never got old. I had spent the past year learning every aspect of my father's company, understanding the business he had built, while searching for the daughter he could not find. It turned out I had a talent for it. The same analytical mind that had made me a good lawyer made me an excellent CEO. Grace was sleeping in her playpen beside my desk, now 1 year old and already showing signs of her mother's stubborn determination. She had taken her first steps 2 weeks ago, and every day she discovered something new about the world. On the bookshelf behind my desk, I kept the letter my father had written me before he died. I had read it so many times I could recite it from memory. My dearest Emma, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you finally know the truth about who you are. I want you to understand that not a day passed that I did not think about you, wonder where you were, hope that you were happy and safe. I made mistakes, too many to count. I let your mother take you because I thought it was what she needed, and I spent the rest of my life regretting that decision. I should have fought harder. I should have found you sooner. I should have been the father you deserved, instead of a stranger who watched from a distance. The company I built is yours now. It was always meant to be yours. Use it to create the life you want, not the life others tell you to want. Be bold, be compassionate, be the person I always knew you could become. And Emma, when you have children of your own, hold them close. Tell them every day that they are loved. Do not make my mistakes. All my love, your father. I wiped a tear from my cheek and turned back to my computer. My assistant knocked softly on the door. Ms. Collins, your 2 o'clock appointment is here. Send him in. Detective Michael Reeves entered with a folder under his arm. He was the FBI agent who had been assigned to the Matthews fraud case, and we had developed a professional relationship over the past year as the investigation unfolded. Good news, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. The sentencing came through this morning. I nodded. And? Brandon Matthews, 18 months in federal prison for embezzlement and fraud. He will also be required to pay $340,000 in restitution, given his current financial situation that will follow him for the rest of his life. And Patricia? No criminal charges, but she has been blacklisted from HR positions at every major corporation in the state. The professional network we contacted made sure of that. She is currently unemployed and living with her daughter, Melissa, in a small apartment on the other side of town. Melissa. I shook my head. What about the defamation suit? Settled out of court, she agreed to take down all the videos and post a public apology. Her influencer career is effectively over. I thought I would feel satisfaction at this news. Instead, I just felt tired. What about Jessica? Detective Reeves consulted his notes. She had her baby 4 months ago. Brandon has never met the child and is making no attempt to seek custody. She is suing him for child support. But given his prison sentence and the restitution order, she is unlikely to see a penny. I looked at Grace, sleeping peacefully beside my desk. In another life, that could have been me, a woman abandoned by a man who made promises he never intended to keep, left to raise a child alone with no resources and no support. The difference was that I had gotten lucky, an inheritance I never expected, power I never sought, resources that let me fight back against a system designed to grind people like me into dust. Not everyone was that lucky. I turned to Detective Reeves. "Thank you for the update." "Of course." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it is worth, Ms. Collins, I have been doing this job for 20 years. I have seen a lot of people use power for revenge. What you did, using this situation to expose systematic problems and protect other employees from similar abuse, that is rare. Your father would be proud." After he left, I sat in silence for a long moment. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Dinner tonight? I found a new recipe I want to try. Bring Grace. Bring wine." I smiled. Some things never changed. I texted back, "See you at 7. That evening, sitting in Diane's kitchen with Grace on my lap and a glass of wine in my hand, I reflected on the year that had passed. I had taken a company I knew nothing about and turned it into something I was proud of. I had implemented new HR policies that protected employees from the kind of abuse Patricia had enabled. I had started a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing legal education. I had created a life that was entirely my own. "What are you thinking about?" Diane asked, watching me stare into space. "Everything." I set down my wine glass. A year ago, I was sitting in the same kitchen, convinced my life was over. Now look at where we are. Diane smiled. "Honey, your life was never over. It was just getting started." Grace reached for my wine glass, and I gently redirected her toward her sippy cup. "Here's what I learned from everything I went through," I said. "The system is not designed for justice. It is designed for whoever has more resources to fight longer. That is true, and that is terrible, and that is something we need to change." I looked at Diane, but I also learned that you do not have to wait for the system to save you. You can document everything. You can ask for help. You can find people who will fight alongside you. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, the universe gives you an opportunity to fight back. And if you are not lucky, then you keep fighting anyway. Because your circumstances are not your character. I had nothing when this started, and I have everything now. But I was the same person both times. The only difference is that now I have the resources to help other people who are where I was. Diane raised her glass. To fighting back, I clinked my glass against hers. To never being the perfect wife again. We both laughed. Later that night, after Grace was asleep, in the portable crib Diane kept for our visits, I sat on the back porch and looked up at the stars. Somewhere in a federal prison, Brandon Matthews was beginning the first night of an 18-month sentence. Somewhere in a cramped apartment, Patricia Matthews was wondering where her life had gone wrong. Somewhere out there, Melissa and Jessica were dealing with the consequences of the choices they had made. I did not feel satisfaction. I did not feel triumph. I just felt free. My phone buzzed. An unknown number with a text message I had not expected. "Congratulations on your victory. Your father would be proud, but you should know that Richard Collins had enemies, powerful ones, and now that you have taken his place, you have inherited them too. Watch your back, Emma. The people who wanted to destroy your father know exactly who you are now, and they are not finished." I stared at the message for a long time. A year ago, a text like this would have sent me spiraling into fear. Now, I felt something different. Not fear exactly, but a kind of determination. I had survived an abusive marriage. I had survived a system designed to crush me. I had survived the complete destruction of the life I thought I wanted, and built something better from the ashes. Whatever was coming next, I would survive that too. I texted Diane from the porch. I might need your help again soon. Her response came immediately. Honey, I told you. Anytime, day or night. What is going on? I am not sure yet, but I have a feeling my story is not over. Then we will figure it out together. That is what family does. I smiled at the word family. A year ago, I thought I had no one. No parents, no siblings, no friends who had not been alienated by my marriage. Now I had Diane. I had Grace. I had a company full of people who depended on me and trusted me and believed in what I was trying to build. I had a family I had chosen, which was worth more than any family I had been born into. I looked up at the stars one more time, thinking about my father watching from somewhere beyond. I understand now, I whispered to him, why you left me everything. Not because I deserved it, but because you knew I would use it well. A cool breeze rustled through the trees, and for just a moment I could have sworn I heard a voice on the wind. I always knew you would. I went inside, kissed Grace goodnight, and slept better than I had in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new enemies to face, new battles to fight. But tonight, I was at peace. And that was enough. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, please share it with them. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story that will change how you see the world. And if you want to hear part 2, where Emma faces the dangerous enemies her father left behind, let me know by leaving a comment and giving this video a like. Your support helps us create more content that matters. Now, let us begin. Closing disclaimer. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and authentic emotional value to our audience. Every story we create is designed not just to entertain, but to inspire reflection, provide practical wisdom, and remind you that no matter how powerless you feel today, your circumstances do not define your worth or your future. Thank you for being part of this community.